Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. My grandfather was the most hated man in this county. They called him cold. They called him a miser. They said he loved money more than blood. And now I was standing in his hallway, with his iron key digging into my palm, staring at the one door he kept locked since 1970. The house smelled like dust, mothballs, and old rain trapped in wood. The light over my head flickered weak and yellow. Somewhere below us, a pipe knocked like a nervous fist. I thought that room held a fortune. I thought I was about to prove everyone right. I was wrong. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. And before this day was over, I would find out how a man the whole town despised had spent 50 years building a secret no one was supposed to see. Not even family. The first time I heard the story of the forbidden room, I was 8 years old and hiding under my grandmother's dining table while the adults whispered over coffee. I still remember the smell of burnt pecan pie and cigarette smoke hanging in the curtains. The window was open, and summer cicadas screamed outside like they were trying to warn somebody. My Aunt Darlene said he'd sooner burn the whole house down than let anybody see what's in there. My mother told her to hush. And Granddad from the kitchen doorway said only one thing. Touch that door, and you touch the end of your name in this house. He didn't raise his voice. That was the scary part. He never had to. Around town, people talked about him the way folks talk about storms that never leave. At Mercer's diner, under the smell of bacon grease and old coffee, they said he counted every penny twice. At church, where lemon polish and hymn books made the air feel too clean, they said he never gave $1 to anybody. At the feed store, with country radio crackling and seed dust in the air, men said he had money buried in mason jars and trusted nobody. When somebody's roof collapsed, he didn't help. When the town fund needed donations, his name was never there. When kids sold raffle tickets for baseball uniforms, he shut the door in their faces. That was the legend. Elias Vale, the cold man on the hill. And yet he lived in a house that looked half abandoned. Paint peeling like old sunburned skin. Roof sagging over the porch. A gutter always rattling in the wind. If he had all that money, nobody could understand why he slept under stained ceilings and drafty windows. That mystery made people meaner. People can forgive poverty. They struggle to forgive secrecy. I used to hate him for it too. Not because of the money. Because of my mother. Every Christmas, she'd smooth her dress, bring a pie, and sit in his living room trying to coax one real conversation out of him. The room always smelled like cold brick and black tea. The clock ticked so loud it felt rude. He would ask if her car needed gas, if the tires were worn, if the furnace was working. Never how are you. Never stay longer. Never I missed you. When we left, she'd smile in the driveway and cry after we turned the corner. So when the lawyer called and told me the estate was mine, I didn't feel grief first. I felt suspicion. Then anger. Then, if I'm being honest, temptation. Because the whole town had planted the same idea in my head for years. There was something valuable behind that door. Something worth protecting more than family. That temptation got a name the morning after the funeral. Carl Weller, county tax assessor. My grandfather's golfing enemy. And the kind of man who smiled with only one side of his mouth. He met me at the front gate, while the grass was still wet, and the air smelled like wet leaves and diesel from the highway. He leaned on his truck and said, "Old Elia's probably left enough hidden in there to fix this shack twice over." Then he looked at the upstairs window. The hallway window. The one facing the locked room. "You find cash, bonds, gold," he said. "Don't let sentiment waste your chance. A man like that doesn't save for noble reasons." That was the voice of the whole town. Not grief. Not memory. Just inventory. What did the old miser leave, and how fast can it be converted? But then Rose showed up. 72 years old. My grandfather's next-door neighbor. 5 feet of denim, floral perfume, and unstoppable opinions. She arrived carrying a casserole I did not ask for, humming off-key, with flour on her sleeve and a flashlight in her purse bigger than a police baton. The porch boards creaked under her steps, and she said, "Honey, any house with a dead man's mystery room needs 2 things, food and a witness." I laughed for the first time in days. That made her immediately suspicious of me. "Don't get soft," she said. "I'm only here because your grandfather once fixed my radiator in January and refused payment, which is very annoying when you're trying to hate a man properly." That stopped me, because no one told stories like that about him. Not in public. Not where reputations lived. Rose helped me sort the downstairs papers that afternoon. Dust floated through sharp bars of light from the windows. Cardboard scraped across the floor. A storm was building outside, and thunder rolled low over the hills. In a kitchen drawer, under old rubber bands and a church bulletin from 1994, I found a small brass tag. Stamped on it were 3 words. "For after." Nothing else. No explanation. Just those 2 words that suddenly made the whole house feel like it was waiting for me. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. I said it out loud this time. Rose looked up from a stack of receipts and said, "Then quit circling it like a raccoon around a trap." She reached into her purse, pulled out that ridiculous flashlight and clicked it on. Its white beam cut through the dim room like a blade. "Let's go meet your ghost." So we climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under our weight. The hallway smelled like mildew, iron, and something else beneath it, paper maybe. Old paper. The kind that keeps secrets longer than people do. At the end of the hall, the door waited under a weak square of evening light. 2 bolts. Black iron hinges. A lock polished bright from years of his hand touching it. I could hear rain starting against the roof. Soft at first. Then harder. Like applause. My hand shook when I lifted the key. Not because I was afraid of what was inside. Because I was afraid the town had been right all along. That there was nothing behind this door except proof that he had loved money more than us. Rose rested her hand on my shoulder. The flashlight hummed softly. The storm deepened. And the old house, for one strange second, seemed to hold its breath with me. Then I slid the key into the lock. And from the other side of that door, something shifted. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. The sound came again. Small. Dry. Like paper brushing paper on the other side of the door. Not a person. Not footsteps. Just the whisper of something waiting too long to be seen. Rose's flashlight beam trembled across the lock. Rain hammered the roof harder now, and wind pressed against the old windows until the hallway moaned around us. I tightened my hand on the iron key and turned it. Once, the first bolt snapped back with a hard metal clack. Twice, The second one dragged like it hadn't moved in years. Then the lock gave. A deep, ugly click. The kind of sound that feels less like opening something and more like waking it up. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. That was the promise. But when I put my hand on the knob, I realized I had no promise for what came after. The brass felt cold. I turned it slowly. The door stuck for a second, swollen in the frame from age and damp. Then it opened 3 inches with a sigh of stale air. A smell rolled out at us. Dust. Old paper. Leather. And something medicinal beneath it, faint and clean, like camphor or wintergreen buried under time. Not the smell of treasure. Not moldy cash. Not metal. Not greed. I pushed the door wider. Rose raised the flashlight, and the beam swept across the room. She sucked in a breath so sharply, I felt it in my own chest. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "This ain't a vault." No. It wasn't. It was a record of lives. Floor to ceiling. Wall to wall. Shelves lined with ledgers. Index cards stacked in labeled trays. Photographs pinned into careful rows. Envelopes tied with string. Faded newspaper clippings. Maps marked with red and blue pencil. Receipts. Deeds. Medical forms. Letters. And names. So many names. They were written everywhere. On cards. On file tabs. In ledger columns so straight they looked military. Some names were circled. Some had dates beside them. Some had little check marks. Others had notes in my grandfather's small, hard handwriting. Paid in full. Renew by October. Anonymous. Do not contact directly. Children first. For a second, all I could do was stare. The rain kept pounding outside. The flashlight beam slid over a bulletin board dense with photographs of strangers. A boy on a porch with a cast on his leg. A woman standing beside a truck with a baby on her hip. An old couple in front of a farmhouse. A high school graduation picture. A newspaper clipping about a flood 2 counties over. Every image had notes pinned beneath it. Dates. Addresses. Amounts. Needs. Follow-ups. Like somebody had been running a rescue operation out of a locked bedroom for half a century. Rose stepped in first. The floorboards creaked under her shoes. Her floral perfume mixed strangely with the papery air. She moved the flashlight across the nearest shelf and read one of the labels aloud. Medical. Then another. Farm liens. Then another. Veterans' families. She turned and looked at me, eyes wide. Your grandfather built himself an office for ghosts. I didn't answer. Because on the far wall, above a desk lit by a green banker's lamp, was something that made the room tilt under me. One single photograph hung in the center, larger than all the rest. Black and white. A young man in uniform. Maybe 20. Maybe 21. Serious face. Square shoulders. Eyes fixed straight on the camera. Underneath it, my grandfather had written one line. Begin here. My skin went cold. Not from fear. From recognition without understanding. That sentence meant this whole room led back to one person. One event. One starting wound. I crossed to the desk. The banker's lamp still worked. Rose found the switch on the wall, and after 2 weak flickers, a ceiling light came alive overhead. The room glowed amber. Dust spun slowly in the air. And suddenly the details sharpened. A typewriter with a fresh ribbon case beside it. 3 sharpened pencils, laid exactly parallel. A calendar from 8 years ago, still open to September. A pair of reading glasses folded over a ledger, as if he might come back any second and finish the line. This wasn't a dead room. It was interrupted work. On the desk sat a wooden tray marked current. Inside were 6 manila folders. Not old. Current. Active. My grandfather had been using this room right up to the end. My fingers hovered over the first folder. I don't know why I hesitated. Maybe because opening the door had felt like solving a mystery. Opening the files felt like trespassing into somebody's private pain. But then I looked again at the photo on the wall. Begin here. He had left instructions. Maybe not for the town. Maybe not for my mother. But for whoever came after. For after. So I opened the top folder. Inside was a hospital invoice from Ohio. Pediatric respiratory care. Past due. Then stamped in red across the final page, paid. No sender listed. No explanation. Just a note clipped to the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Mother works nights, son 7 years old, no local family, continue through winter. Rose sat down hard in the desk chair opposite me. It gave a little squeal under her. She blinked at the page. That old devil, she said softly. But there was no insult left in it now. Only disbelief. I reached for the second file. This one held a county deed transfer from Missouri. A farm nearly lost to foreclosure. Handwritten note attached. Children requested to remain on land through harvest, arranged through intermediary. My heart started beating harder. Not because I finally understood. Because I understood even less. This was too systematic. Too careful. Too disciplined. It wasn't random charity. It was repayment. It was penance with paperwork. Then the third thing caught my eye. On a wooden stand in the corner, protected beneath a clear plastic cover, hung an old uniform jacket. Breast. Brushed. Cared for. The fabric was faded, but the name tape was still visible. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the preservation box beneath it. My throat tightened before I even read the name. Rose came to stand beside me. Thunder cracked outside, close enough to shake the glass. And there, stitched above the pocket, was the name that made this room stop being a mystery and become a confession. Thomas Bell. Not my grandfather's name. Somebody else's. Somebody important enough to build a whole hidden life around. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Now I knew one thing for certain. He hadn't been hiding money. He'd been hiding a debt. And Thomas Bell was at the center of it. Then Rose lifted the flap of a box beneath the uniform. Inside was a stack of letters tied with black ribbon. And on top of them sat a single sealed envelope addressed in my grandfather's hand. To my granddaughter, if you open the room too soon. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. For a second, I forgot to breathe. The envelope lay on top of those black ribbon letters like it had been waiting for my hand, and my hand alone. Rain lashed the windows. The old house groaned around us. And Rose, for once in her life, said absolutely nothing. I picked up the envelope carefully. The paper was thick and yellowed at the edges. It smelled faintly of dust, cedar, and the dry sweetness old stationery gets after years in a closed room. On the front, in my grandfather's tight handwriting, it said, "To my granddaughter, if you open the room too soon." Too soon. That phrase dug into me. Not if you open the room. Not when you find this. Too soon. As if there had been a right time. As if he had wanted this hidden until the exact moment it could do the least damage, or the most good. Rose leaned close enough for her perfume to cut through the paper smell. "Well," she murmured, "he certainly knew how to make an entrance from the grave." Her voice was light, but I could hear the strain in it. She was rattled. So was I. I slid one finger under the flap. The seal gave softly. Outside, thunder rolled low over the hills. Inside, the room felt warmer now, crowded with his presence, as if every page and photo and note had been holding in the breath he never spent on explanation. There was only one sheet inside. Jord. Not a confession. Not yet. Instructions. It read, "If you are reading this, then I failed to finish the work myself. Begin with Bell. Begin with 1970. Do not let the town tell you the meaning before the papers do. They were wrong about many things. I earned some of it, not all of it. If there is any mercy left for me, it is not in what I meant. It is in what I did after." I read it twice. Then a third time. The room was so quiet that I could hear the tiny buzz in the ceiling light. Rose looked over my shoulder. "He wrote like he swallowed nails," she said. But even she didn't joke after that. "Begin with Bell. Begin with 1970. So I did. The letters under the ribbon were all addressed to the same person. Thomas Bell. Some had military postmarks. Some had hospital forwarding labels. The oldest was dated May 1970. I untied the ribbon. My fingers shook harder than before. Not from fear of the room now. From fear of understanding him. The first letter was brief. The paper had gone thin at the folds, and the ink had feathered a little into the grain. I could smell that faint mineral scent old ink gets when it dries for decades. My grandfather's handwriting was younger there, less controlled, less like barbed wire. "Tom, I was told you may not wish to hear from me. I understand that. But I am writing because there must be a record somewhere that I did not walk away untouched. I have replayed that day in my head until I no longer trust my own memory to hold it honestly. I gave the order. You paid for it. There is no arrangement of words that can make that sentence smaller." I stopped reading. My throat closed. Rain beat against the glass like 1,000 fingers tapping to be let in. Rose whispered, "Oh. Just that. One word." But it filled the room. I kept going. I am told a man should forgive himself if the damage was unintended. That counsel is for cleaner souls than mine. I knew enough to hesitate, and I spoke anyway. If your future has narrowed because of my certainty, then any comfort given to me by others is theft. No details. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know 1970 was no rumor, no imagined regret. He had hurt Thomas Bell. Badly enough to build a hidden life around it. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Now the shape of it was starting to show. Not greed. Guilt with a long memory. Guilt organized into folders and dates and payments. I went to the wall of ledgers and found the section marked Bell Family Line. There were 12 binders. 12. Each labeled with a date range in white ink. 1970, 1974. 1975, 1979. And on and on. Decades of tracking. Decades of watching over people who, if the notes were right, often had no idea who was helping them. Rose gave a low whistle. "That isn't charity," she said. "That's a sentence." She was right. It felt less like generosity and more like a punishment he had written for himself and served in secret. I pulled the first binder free. Dust rose in a pale cloud. Its spine cracked softly when I opened it. Inside were copies of letters, hospital paperwork, notes from phone calls, and small, precise expense entries. Every line item had dates, initials, and one recurring phrase in the margin. "Keep them whole." That phrase hit me harder than it should have, because it sounded nothing like the man I knew. The man who never hugged. The man who could make a room feel unwelcome by entering it. And yet here he was, across 50 years of paper, trying to keep strangers whole. The binder laid out the first years after 1970 in brutal, quiet detail. Thomas Bell had been injured. Not killed. Not at first. Injured badly enough that his work, whatever it had been, never came back to him the same way. There were notes about rehabilitation, a relocation, a marriage delayed, bills forwarded, a child born 3 years later, employment difficulties, mounting debt. And in the margins of every update, my grandfather's handwriting grew more clipped, more severe, as though he believed neatness itself might somehow counterbalance harm. Then I found the first photograph of Thomas Bell's family. A Polaroid. Slightly curled. A young woman in a checked dress holding a baby on a porch. Thomas sat in a chair beside her. He was smiling, but not fully. One leg was stretched awkwardly, braced. On the back of the photo, in my grandfather's hand, it said, "First child, summer light, he looks tired. Send school bond in mother's cousin's name when time comes." I had to set the photo down. The room suddenly felt close, almost airless. The scent of paper and cedar thickened in my nose. This wasn't one grand act of repentance. It was thousands of smaller acts. Rent, tuition, medical bills, crop losses, emergency repairs. Every time the damage from 1970 spread into the next generation, he had moved money quietly to meet it. No credit, no praise. No one to stand up in church and call him generous. Just work. Just debt. And then Rose found something that changed the temperature in the room. A metal recipe box on the desk. Inside it were index cards, alphabetized, each with a person's name, and a relation to Thomas Bell written in pencil. Daughter. Grandson. Widow. Great-granddaughter. There were birthdays, school years, illnesses, addresses crossed out and updated. Beside some names were simple notes that almost broke me. Loves horses. Asthma worsens in winter. Excellent in math, quiet. Lost father early, watch this branch carefully. This man, Rose said almost to herself, memorized a family he never belonged to. No. Worse than that. He had made himself belong to their suffering because he believed he caused it. And that was when the temptation returned. Not from Carl Weller at the gate. From inside me. A darker, easier voice. The voice that said this could all still be performance. Records can be staged. Paper can lie. A bitter man might build his own absolution and leave it behind like a trap for the family to admire. I hated that voice. But I heard it. Maybe Rose heard it too, because she suddenly said, "Find the ugly part." I looked at her. She folded her arms. If this is real, there will be something here that makes him look worse, not better. Men don't preserve only the flattering evidence unless they're writing a sales pitch. It was exactly the right thing to say. Lovable, practical Rose, dragging the truth forward by the collar. So I searched for the ugly part. And I found it in a red folder tucked beneath the binders. On the tab in block letters, my grandfather had written, "The day of the order." My mouth went dry. The folder was thicker than the others. Inside were statements, typed copies, handwritten notes, a map, 2 telegrams, and 1 newspaper clipping, so worn it nearly tore when I lifted it. The headline mentioned a training accident in 1970. Not combat. Training. Domestic. Preventable. I felt something cold slide through me. The uniform on the wall. The medical bills. The decades of secret payments. All of it suddenly locked into a harsher shape. This wasn't the aftermath of war far away. This was a mistake made close enough to hear. Close enough to own. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. And now sunset was coming. The storm clouds had turned the windows the color of pewter. The room was dimming around the edges. And in my hand was the folder that held the one moment capable of explaining 50 years of silence. I opened to the first statement. Read the date. Read my grandfather's name. Read Thomas Bell's. And by the third line, I realized why he had hidden this room from everyone who loved him. Because the truth did not make him look misunderstood. The truth made him look guilty. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Because the truth did not make him look misunderstood. The truth made him look guilty. I sat down hard in my grandfather's chair. The cushion breathed out a stale puff of dust and old wool. The banker's lamp threw a green pool of light over the red folder in my lap. Rain rattled the window panes. The whole room smelled like paper, cedar, and the metallic edge that comes before lightning. Rose stayed beside me, one hand on the desk, her flashlight resting dark against her hip. Neither of us spoke. Some silences feel respectful. This one felt loaded. I read the first statement. Then the second. Then I went back and read the first again, because I needed it to say something else. Something softer. Something accidental, in a way that would let me keep my anger simple. But the papers were merciless. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just clean typed facts. And facts, when they're bad enough, can be crueler than any rumor. In 1970, my grandfather had been a training supervisor at a stateside military facility. Young. Sharp. Ambitious. The kind of man who believed hesitation was weakness and certainty was leadership. Thomas Bell had been under him. Not a stranger. Not a distant name on a form. A man he knew. A man he had trained with. A man the witness statements described as careful. Respected. Steady under pressure. The exercise that day had involved damaged equipment, bad weather, and a call that should have been delayed. At least 2 people objected. Thomas Bell was one of them. That detail sat on the page like a nail. He objected. He said the conditions weren't right. He said visibility was poor. He said the mechanism needed another inspection. And my grandfather overruled him. Rose let out a long breath through her nose. I could hear the old floor ticking under the rain-cooled air. I could hear the paper in my hands trembling slightly. I kept reading. During the exercise, the equipment failed. Thomas Bell took the worst of it. He survived. But survived can be a dishonest word. Survived only means not buried that week. It doesn't tell you what was taken. His injuries were severe. Crushing damage to one leg. Spinal trauma. Months of rehab. Permanent limitation. The file never said the exact phrase, ruined future. It didn't have to. It was in every line that followed. Transfer denied. Career path ended. Medical discharge discussions. Compensation disputes. Appeals. Delays. More delays. And at the bottom of one witness page, clipped in my grandfather's hand, was the line that broke whatever distance I still had left. Bell warned me. I chose speed over doubt. I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not fate. Not one of those family myths where time smooths sharp edges into something easy to repeat at funerals. He had been warned. He had made the call anyway. And another man had paid for his certainty with the rest of his life. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Now I knew the first half. He was hiding blame. Not imagined blame. Earned blame. But the second half was stranger. Because blame alone doesn't build a room like this. Blame can make a man drink. Or run. Or grow mean and old and impossible to love. Maybe it had done some of that too. But this room was structure. Devotion. A whole private government of repair. So I kept going. Behind the witness statements was a packet of correspondence from the years after the accident. Requests. Claims. Denials. Internal notes. Stiff language. Official language. Language designed to make suffering sound procedural. And threaded through it all were copies of letters from my grandfather, some sent, some unsent, trying to push money, favors, referrals, anything he could manage toward Thomas Bell without making it public. One unsent letter had no greeting. Just a paragraph in the middle of a page. If I testify more plainly, I lose my post and perhaps the means to help. If I protect my position, I become exactly the kind of man you already know me to be. That one hit hard. Because it explained something ugly. He had not made a clean, heroic choice after the accident. He had compromised. He had tried to keep enough standing, enough income, enough access to do good later. Maybe that was practical. Maybe cowardly. Probably both. The papers didn't ask me to forgive him. They only refused to simplify him. Rose read that page over my shoulder and muttered, "Well, there's your ugly part." She was right. He hadn't marched into daylight and confessed everything. He had stayed useful. Stayed employed. Stayed disliked. And then, somehow, spent the next 50 years redirecting nearly everything he had into one family's survival. I moved to the next binder. Then the next. And that was where the room turned from confession into obsession. The Bell family's hardships were mapped year by year. A missed mortgage payment here. A surgery there. A scholarship gap. A transmission failure. Heating oil in winter. Legal help after a land dispute. Emergency dental work. Rent covered through an intermediary. Seed money for a small business. Always indirect. Always hidden. Always with a note about dignity. Do not humiliate. Never arrive as savior. Make it look like luck if possible. That phrase broke me more than the money. Make it look like luck if possible. He knew enough to understand that help can wound if it arrives wearing its own pride. So he kept himself out of it. No plaques. No gratitude. No absolution delivered by the people he'd harmed. Just anonymous mercy, over and over, for people who likely cursed his name without knowing where their second chances came from. And then the chaos sequence started. Not in the past. Right there in the present. Right there in that room. Rose had been sorting recent files from the tray marked current while I read. Outside, the storm dropped the sky into near darkness, even though it wasn't late yet. The lights flickered. The house gave one deep shudder in the wind. And Rose suddenly said, "Honey, I think one of these people still needs help." I looked up. She held a fresh folder in both hands. Not yellowed. Not archival. Fresh. Inside was a printout from a rehab center in Tennessee. A young woman named Leela Bell. Age 19. Great-granddaughter. Recent injury. Temporary guardian issue. Housing unstable. Therapy payments due in 12 days. Attached note in my grandfather's hand. Bridge this quietly, she must not lose treatment. The date on the note was 2 weeks before he died. 2 weeks. He had been working this case, while the town was gossiping about whether he'd finally leave them gold in the walls. He had been planning one more rescue, while his own life was running out. Rose was already moving. That was Rose. Grief later. Action first. She snapped her flashlight back on, dug reading glasses out of her purse and said, "Don't just stare at me. If the old man handed you a relay baton, run." The room became a storm inside a storm. Papers sliding. Desk drawers opening. Rain pounding overhead. The smell of dust kicked up by frantic searching. A drawer stuck and then popped loose with a wooden crack. Rose found a contact list. I found envelopes of cashier's checks, each labeled only with initials and dates. A legal pad held numbers for intermediaries in 3 states. A second folder had case notes on Leela's mother, then grandmother, then Thomas Bell himself. 4 generations. 1 long line of damage. 1 old man trying to stand in the breach. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Now sunset didn't matter. A living person needed help. That changed the room from museum to mission. The power cut out. Just like that. The ceiling light died with a soft snap. The banker's lamp blinked off. And the room fell into darkness, except for Rose's flashlight beam, sharp and white and shaking slightly in her hand. Thunder cracked so hard the window glass rattled in its frame. From downstairs came the sound of something falling over in the kitchen. "Wonderful," Rose muttered. Dead man's mystery room, active storm, and I wore the wrong bra for heroics. I laughed despite myself. A quick shocked laugh. And then I nearly cried right after it. That's what the room was doing to me. Breaking one version of him apart, while forcing another into shape. We worked by flashlight. Rose read notes aloud. I matched names to folders. Wind shoved rain through the cracked edge of the hallway window, bringing in the smell of wet leaves and mud. My sleeves picked up dust and ink. Somewhere downstairs, the loose gutter clanged like a bell. And in the middle of all that noise, I found a black journal in the back of the desk drawer. No label. Just black leather, worn soft at the corners. A ribbon marker tucked halfway through. I opened it to the marked page. The handwriting was slower there. Older. More tired. I once believed making the right call was the same as being the right man. Bell looked at the machine, then at the weather, then at me. He knew. I knew enough to pause. Pride is often only hesitation with an audience. I spoke because men were watching. He suffered because I did not want to appear uncertain in front of them. I shut the journal and pressed it against my chest. There it was. The ugliest truth so far. Not greed. Not cruelty for its own sake. Vanity. Male pride in a dangerous room. The oldest stupid sin on earth. Rose lowered the flashlight a little. Her face had gone soft in a way I hadn't seen before. He knew exactly what he was, she said. Yes, I whispered. And maybe that was the most painful part. He had not spent 50 years atoning for something he barely understood. He had spent 50 years staring straight at it. Then Rose's flashlight landed on one final item, tucked inside the journal's back pocket. A folded sheet. Newer paper. Addressed simply, "For whoever continues this." The storm roared. The old house shook. Leila Bell's folder lay open on the desk. Thomas Bell's uniform watched from the wall. And in my hand was the page that would tell me whether my grandfather believed his debt could ever truly be paid. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. The page in my hand was lighter than it should have been. One sheet. That was all. One sheet to answer for a room full of records, a wall full of strangers, and 50 years of a man living like punishment had moved into his bones. Rose held the flashlight steady over my shoulder. The beam shook only a little now. Outside, thunder rolled farther off, but the rain still hissed against the windows and down the gutters. The room smelled like wet wood, old paper, and the metallic ghost of the storm. The house had gone quiet in that strange way old houses do after a hard burst of weather, as if it too was listening. I unfolded the page. The handwriting was my grandfather's, but weaker than the journal entries. The strokes wandered slightly. He had written this near the end. Maybe when he knew he was running out of time. It said, "If you are reading this, then the work has outlived me. That is proper. It was never work for one lifetime. If I have done any good, do not mistake it for balance. There is no balance. A ruined future does not become unruined because another family eats in winter. I did not help them to clear my name. I helped because the damage kept traveling and I could still see it moving." I swallowed hard. The room blurred for a second, not from the dim light this time. From grief. Real grief. Not for the man I thought I knew. For the one I never bothered to imagine. I kept reading. The town preferred a simple villain. I allowed that. It cost them less. It also kept curious hands away from those who deserved privacy more than I deserved defense. Let them say miser. Let them say cold. Praise is cheap and spreads fast. So does scandal. Silence was more useful. Rose made a sound in her throat. Not quite a sob. Not quite anger. More like the noise people make when a truth lands late and hard. Because that was the part none of us had guessed. He had not only hidden the room to protect himself from being judged. He had hidden it to protect the Bell family from being turned into a story. A town like ours could make a meal out of other people's pain. He knew that. He let himself be the easier meal. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. Now I knew. He was hiding a lifetime of atonement. And he was hiding it inside the reputation of a villain. The letter continued. If there is money left, it belongs first to the continuation of the Bell file. Start with Leela. Do not announce yourself as my kin unless necessity demands it. Help without spectacle. Repair without ownership. Do not ask them to heal me in words. I was not owed that. There it was. Not a request. A standard. Almost harsh in its clarity. Help without spectacle. Repair without ownership. The phrases settled into me like something older than advice. Like a rule he had paid dearly to learn. Then I reached the final paragraph. As for Thomas Bell, I failed him first in public and then in private. In public because I chose certainty over caution. In private because I believed secret labor excused open cowardice. It does not. If you can do one thing I did not, tell the truth plainly. He warned me. I overruled him. His life narrowed after mine did not. Write that somewhere I cannot soften it any more. I stopped. The rain softened. A single drop ticked somewhere into a metal pan downstairs. Rose's flashlight beam had drifted to the desk, where Leela Bell's folder still waited open like the future, refusing to stay politely outside the door. That final paragraph changed everything. Because until then, his atonement had still lived in private. Precise. Massive. Secret. But secret all the same. And now, with one page, he had asked for the thing he had resisted for 50 years. Plain truth. Not flattering truth. Not redemptive truth. Just truth. Rose exhaled slowly. Well, she said, voice unsteady, that stubborn old man picked one hell of a time to finally become decent out loud. I almost smiled. Almost. But the smile broke into tears before it could become anything else. I cried there in that room. In the stale paper air. Under the gaze of Thomas Bell's uniform. With storm water whispering down the gutters outside. I cried for my mother, who had spent her whole life trying to pull tenderness out of a man who had buried it under duty and shame. I cried for Thomas Bell, who had to live inside the consequences of another man's pride. I cried for the Bell children and grandchildren, helped in secret by a name they might have hated if they knew it. And I cried for my grandfather, because by then I understood the ugliest thing about remorse. It does not make you noble. It only keeps you awake. When I could breathe again, Rose handed me a handkerchief from her purse. It smelled faintly of lavender and peppermint. Now what? She asked. That was Rose. Never unkind, but always dragging feeling back into action. Now what? The answer came fast. Faster than anything else had that day. Because the room had already told me. Start with Leela. We spent the next hour in flashlight glow and storm-dim evening sorting everything we needed. Account numbers. A trust document. Names of intermediaries my grandfather had used to keep help anonymous. Instructions for the lawyer. Emergency contact options. A note clipped to Leela's rehab paperwork. Do not let interruption become destiny. This is where these families lose decades. Small gaps become permanent damage. That note chilled me, because it showed how precisely he had studied suffering. He knew the real danger wasn't always the original catastrophe. Sometimes it was the gap after. The mistreatment. The unpaid month. The forced move. The interruption that hardens into a lifetime. Maybe that was what he had been fighting all along. Not the past itself. Its echoes. By the time the storm began to move off, the sky outside the hallway window had gone from pewter to bruised violet. The rain lightened. The house smelled cleaner, washed through with damp earth and old pine. Somewhere a screen door banged in the wind and then settled. The power had not yet returned. But the darkness no longer felt haunted. It felt occupied. By truth. By duty. By one final task. And that was the public reckoning. Not the next week. Not after lawyers. That night. Because once I read his last instruction, I knew silence would no longer serve the same purpose. Silence had protected the family while he worked. Now silence would only protect the lie. So I took the red folder. I took the final letter. I took copies of the pages that named Thomas Bell and the order that changed his life. And I drove with Rose through wet roads and dripping oak branches to the only place in town where stories ever truly became official. Mercer's Diner. It was just after dinner rush. The neon sign buzzed red in the damp dark. Inside, the place smelled like coffee, fried onions, and rain steaming off denim jackets. Silverware clinked. Country music murmured low from a radio near the pie case. Every booth seemed to hold somebody who had called my grandfather cold, at least once in the last 10 years. Carl Weller was there too, of course, hunched over a mug, already halfway turned toward the door before I even crossed it. Conversation dipped when they saw me, then dipped lower when they saw what I carried. Papers. Files. Proof of something. You could feel curiosity sharpen in the room like a blade. Carl spoke first. Find the gold. One crooked little smile. That one-sided mouth again. The old temptation villain. Turn it into inventory. Turn a life into assets. No, I said. The whole diner went still. I could hear the coffee machine hiss. I could smell burnt sugar from the pie warmer. I set the file on the counter. My grandfather kept a locked room for 50 years, I said. And it wasn't full of money. I looked at every face I had grown up around. People who had repeated the same easy story, so often it hardened into truth. It was full of records, names, bills, deeds, payments, 4 generations worth, all tied to one man. I laid my hand on the red folder. Thomas Bell. Nobody moved. Even Carl's smile flattened. A spoon clinked somewhere in the back and stopped. Then I told them plainly, just as he asked. In 1970, Elias Vale overruled Thomas Bell's warning during a training exercise. The equipment failed. Thomas Bell was permanently injured. His future narrowed. My grandfather's did not. And for the next 50 years, without ever asking for credit, he spent his money and his life trying to keep the Bell family from paying forever for the damage he caused. No one interrupted. That surprised me most. Not one correction. Not one cynical laugh. Even Carl kept quiet. Maybe because the truth, when it finally arrives with dates and names and proof, has a weight gossip can't lift. I read them the final paragraph. Not the whole letter. Just the part that mattered. That he had chosen certainty over caution. That Thomas Bell warned him. That secret labor did not excuse open cowardice. That the truth should be written somewhere, he could not soften it any more. When I finished, the diner stayed quiet for 3 long seconds. Maybe 4. Then Miss Gloria, who had taught 2nd grade for 30 years and judged everyone like it was a civic duty, reached up and took off her glasses. Her eyes were wet. She said very softly, "So that's what he did with it." With it. Not his money. His life. Carl stared into his coffee like it might offer him another version of events. It didn't. Rose, standing beside me with her purse tucked under one arm like a general at rest, said the only thing that could have ended it right. "Turns out the old fool wasn't hoarding gold," she said. "He was spending his soul." No one had a joke after that. No one even had gossip. Just the quiet reckoning of people realizing they had mistaken the shape of a man for the whole of him. Not that this erased what he had done. It didn't. That mattered too. He was guilty. Deeply. Nothing in that room changed Thomas Bell's injury. Nothing changed the lost years. But guilt was not the whole story either. Neither was cruelty. And that, I think, is what stunned the town most. By the time Rose and I stepped back outside, the rain had nearly stopped. The pavement shone black under the streetlights. Somewhere down the block, frogs had started up in the ditch water. The air smelled like wet asphalt, honeysuckle, and the sweet mineral smell that comes after lightning leaves. I looked west. The clouds were breaking. And beyond them, the last edge of sunset was still there. Thin. Gold. Stubborn. Before sunset, I would know what he was hiding. I did. He was hiding sorrow. Discipline. Cowardice. Mercy. Shame. Duty. A whole human mess too heavy for a small town nickname to hold. The next morning, I called the lawyer. Then the intermediary listed for Leila Bell. Therapy was covered. Housing stabilized. The first bridge held. Not because that fixed the past. Because the work was never about fixing the past. It was about stopping the damage from reaching one more child, one more winter, one more interrupted life. I still inherited the house. The crumbling porch. The noisy pipes. The upstairs hallway with the weak yellow light. And at the end of it, the room that was never forbidden because it held treasure. It was forbidden because it held the only honest measure of the man who built it. Not what he said. Not what people thought. What he carried. Sometimes I go in there at dusk. The room still smells like cedar, paper, and dust after rain. Thomas Bell's uniform still hangs in the corner. Rose still comes by with food I did not ask for, and opinions I absolutely need. And on the desk, under the banker's lamp, I keep one card now in my own handwriting. Help without spectacle, repair without ownership. That's the lesson I was left with. The people we judge the fastest are sometimes carrying the heaviest private burdens. Not always. Some people are exactly what they seem. But some are living inside debts, griefs, and promises we never see. And if we're honest, most of us are more than the worst thing we did, and less than the best story told about us. My grandfather was the most hated man in this county. Maybe some people will keep saying that. Maybe they should. Truth doesn't owe us comfort. But now when they say his name, they'll have to say the rest too. That he hurt a man. That he knew it. And that he spent 50 years trying, in the only way he believed he still could, to keep that hurt from becoming a dynasty. And maybe that is all redemption really is. Not erasing what you did. Not being admired. Just refusing to let your worst moment keep spreading after you understand its cost. If there's someone in your family people always judged too quickly, or someone you only understood after it was too late, share that story below. Because sometimes the locked room in a house isn't made of wood and iron. Sometimes it's the part of a person nobody bothered to open. If you want, I can now turn all 5 parts into one polished full script with smoother transitions and consistent timing for voiceover delivery.